I'm going to talk about William Henry Jackson. I'm going to talk about national parks and postcards and how his story blends those things together. I was trained as an anthropologist and worked my career as a professional conservationist, traveling mainly Latin America and many other countries for the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, National Parks Conservation Association. And from the early days, I'm talking 50 years ago, when I would go someplace, I would buy postcards like we do and mail them. And you always have a few left over. When you come home, you throw them in the drawer. After 3 or 4 trips, you look up and you have a postcard collection. So then I realized I was avidly into this. I started buying postcards and going to shows and flea markets. And I was, over the years, drawn increasingly to a particular style of postcard that just captured me. And then studying with more detail, I realized it was by a particular company, the Detroit Publishing Company in Detroit, Michigan. Now I'm a collector and a specialist in this particular company, following that because of just the ethereal quality of the cards. And then I discovered, researching the company, that it was largely created and molded by a guy named William Henry Jackson. And then my career in national parks, setting up national parks as a conservationist and collecting postcards, came together because wham, it turns out that William Henry Jackson is actually the guy who was seminal in creating the world's first national parks, Yellowstone National Park. And he spent his career, became a well-to-do businessman by printing postcards. William Henry Jackson is considered, this is just a highlight of his life, he's considered the greatest of all the Western photographers. When taking photographs of the West was a challenge. His photographs that he brought back from an expedition in 1871 were crucial in convincing Congress to create the world's first national park. He became then, as you know, continuing to be a photographer, he started printing postcards, capitalizing them, and realizing that he could make mold a company around postcards. And so major contribution. And then finally, he's considered to have helped transform Americans' image of what the American West was, from one of romantic wilderness to an actual land of opportunity that Americans should be traveling to and paying attention to. So that's William Henry. William Henry Jackson was born a Quaker in New York, 1843, but even though he was a Quaker, he was what they call a fighting Quaker. He joined the Vermont infantry and worked in the Civil War. When they realized that he had skills as an artist, a map maker, a sketch artist, they started employing him as somebody to produce the Union's maps and describe camp life. After the war, he goes back to Vermont and he works in a photographic shop, back then all black and white, as a hand colorist. He would actually hand color a black and white photograph and to sell to the client. That's going to be crucial in his future, so remember that. He meets up with a bunch of his old army buddies in Vermont, and meantime, he has a fiancée. They have a fight, and he gets on the next train and goes to New York. And in New York, he and his war buddies decide that they're going to travel west to seek their fortune. William Henry Jackson starts out as a bullwhacker and managing supplies. But once out in the West, he meets up with his brother in Omaha, his brother Jackson, and they decide to buy an 8x10 wet glass plate camera, which in those days meant that your negative was a piece of glass, and you have to wet it with certain chemicals, run over to your camera that's waiting, slide the glass plate down into the camera, and then take the cap off the camera for the appropriate number of seconds or minutes so that you actually have captured an image on that plate glass negative. Then you rush that to the chemicals that you have prepared already and are hiding in a dark tent someplace so that you can develop the photograph. And then as you continue on your trips into the West, you're dragging not only your camera and your chemicals, but all the plate glass negatives that you've taken before. So you've got this delicate balance of trying to go into the adventure, but at the same time, keep all your negatives alive. Here's a picture of Jackson actually traveling in his darkroom. It's a traveling darkroom, is what it is. He's traveling out in Nebraska, taking mainly pictures of American Indians and using those to turn into this is part of the romanticism of the American West. It's all about the Indians, even though the Indians are being disappeared. And people have this romantic vision and they want to have photographs of that. Sometimes they put them in their parlor. Sometimes they put it next to a photograph of this great Western landscape vista. But he's making his living doing this, driving around, using a camera like this one on the right. And you see the plate glass, which is going to become your negative with luck. And the bellows on the camera, and then the lens and the lens cap. And the way you take the photograph, instead of going click, is you take the cap off, look at the birdie, look at the tree, you're the prettiest girl in the whole county, and then you put the cap back on and you've just taken a picture on glass. He's traveling around taking photographs, sending them back to his brother in Omaha, and they're making a living as photographers in the early days of photography because it was pretty new. And he meets the fellow named Ferdinand Hayden, who is the head of the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey. He's a geologist, and he's been asked to mount an expedition out to the Yellowstone Basin in 1871 to see, is it true that there are bubbling pots of mud and water that shoots up out of the air in geysers? Is that possibly true? There had been rumors of such things because people like John Coulter, an early famous adventurer out in the West, came back from the area and said, it's true, there are mud pots and geysers. Trappers, French trappers had made it that far down into the Yellowstone and they reported it as well. And so this is the official US government expedition to investigate, is this true that this area is so special? On the way, of course, there was some business activity going on. They're also exploring the area for valuable natural resources, timber, gold, silver, whatever might come up. They got geologists, they got a whole bunch of people on staff, and they're going to come back and report on it. And parts of this, including part of the expedition, is funded by the Northern Pacific Railroad. Northern Pacific Railroad is interested in connecting to the Pacific, of course, and all the areas in between. So they're actually promoting the use of trains. One of the ways that they would like to do that is to discover areas that people from the East might want to visit on their trains. So there's a business, commercial aspect to everything that's going on as well, as usual. Among the members of the expedition, you've got cartographers, geologists, botanists, mineralogists, physicians, and a special guest, Thomas Moran, who was already beginning as a watercolorist and recognizes this guy's pretty good. So at the behest of the railroad, Hayden brings this guy along as well to record images of what the West looked like so that they can entice people to come out there. William Henry Jackson is doing the same thing. He's taking photographs. Of course, there's Thomas Moran. He's got the color aspect. So he and Jackson become best buddies on this expedition, and they will go to a site thinking of the visual aspects of it. William Henry Jackson will set up his camera and take black and white, only black and white photographs of these grand views of the Yellowstone Basin. But Thomas Moran is doing a sketch real quick, and he's saying this part's yellow, this part's brown, make this darker. He's taking color notes on a painting that he's eventually going to do when he gets back to the studio. And you see on the screen the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, the 93 version is one of the paintings that came out of that collaboration, in a sense of being with William Henry Jackson and finding the really best shots for a black and white. But Thomas Moran is going to bring in this visual aspect of color back in his what do you call him, his studio, where he's got his color notes and he's able to produce fantastic images like that, which, by the way, you can see today in the Smithsonian American Art Museum in New York. He's got some really amazing, huge paintings in the Met, in the New York Metropolitan. So 40 days, they travel over the Yellowstone Basin, in and out, looking at animals, finding the most interesting landscapes, and everybody's writing their own report. Our two artists, Thomas Moran and William Henry Jackson, come back and they start displaying what they've done. And people say, my God, it's true. There are really mud pots and there are geysers shooting water out of the ground. And Hayden actually has enough leverage that he's able to get these photographs and paintings into the rotunda of the Capitol building. So they mount an exposition, and all the congressmen walk up the stairs and file around in the circle looking at this place. And there are people standing there saying, yes, it's real, I was there. And you wouldn't believe the opportunities that there are. Congress goes downstairs into the congressional halls and votes yes to create the world's first national park. Oh, they know they want to create a protected area. They don't realize yet that it's going to be a national park, because at the time, there were only state parks in the United States. Yosemite existed as a park, but it was a state park, for example, in California. There was no such thing as a national park until they realized that, look, this is the area we want to protect because it's got mud pots and it's an amazing place. It deserves to be protected. But there are 3 states that are involved in this, because slim parallels of the park are in Idaho, Montana, and then the bulk of it is in Wyoming. So Congress voted, okay, in that case, it's not a state park because we got 3 states. It is a national park. And it is the first national park in the United States, which will go on to become the model for national parks all over the world. Today, there are thousands of national parks, and they all began with Yellowstone, which all began with the fact that these images started coming back. Thomas Moran and William Henry Jackson, that convinced Congress that this place is so special, we got to keep it alive. So William Henry Jackson becomes well known as a photographer. He goes back out west. He moves into Denver and he sets up a studio, and he starts traveling around. He's got his darkroom there on horseback, and he goes to Indian pueblos. He goes to any place that looks interesting for tourism, and he takes photographs to bring back to his Denver studio and produce as what they call parlor prints. You'll have, in a formal parlor in the late 1800s, 1880, 1890, you might have photographs, because photographs are kind of new. So you're showing off your photographs in your parlor. And the best thing to show is your landscape of the far west. And maybe you've been there, maybe you hadn't, but it's the popular thing to do at the time. Also, their magazines are very popular. So William Henry Jackson is taking photographs for magazines. And here he is still, 1872 in this case, developing his negatives in the field. So then he's contacted by the Detroit Photographic Company, as it was known at that time. And they hire him. They say, come and be a photographer with us, and we'll pay you. We'll pay your way around to take photographs and bring them back, and we'll sell those images. And they pay him $30,000, which is probably a sizable amount of money in that at that turn of the century. And they say, and bring your negatives with you. So he moves to Detroit, brings his negatives, and they set up the Detroit Publishing Company, and they publish parlor prints, they publish magazine images, but they really began front-loading postcards, because people are starting to travel and people are beginning to wonder what it looks like out west out there. Is it the land of opportunity? And postcards go crazy. People start producing postcards and sending postcards, and Detroit Publishing Company is right in the middle of that. The real benefit that they've got is that they've just acquired the rights to an invention from Switzerland. 1888, somebody invented the photochrome process for color reproduction. And Jackson figures out how to ride that market of color photographs, these color reproductions, using a process that I'm going to describe here in a minute. And the company starts printing millions of Phostent color postcards. They name them Phostent as the brand name. The lithography that's used, color lithography, is the generic term for what they're doing, in which you have to transfer the same image. Let's say you have an image of a waterfall in Yellowstone. You want to make a color image of that, a color postcard of that. So you transfer your black and white photo negative to limestone stone tablets that have to be absolutely smooth. You can go on YouTube and look up Phostent or photochrome, and the process is so complicated that just to produce a single image, a single stone smooth enough to take a negative, takes days. But with a combination of different chemicals, gum, Arabic, benzene, and sunlight, you lay your black and white image on the stone that's finally smoothed. At the appropriate amount of time to take in sunlight, you pick it up and you move it to the next stone, the same negative, until you've done 8 to 10 consecutive limestone tablets, each one of which will have the appropriate section of it colored so that you can work toward a color image. A color postcard is what it's going to end up being. So you take this damp piece of paper and you move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times, 9 times to capture all the colors, and the end product is an authentic full color image of what had been a black and white photograph. I have to admit, I can't not explain it any better than that. You take 8 or 10 limestone tablets, you got a black and white negative, magic happens, and out on the other end pops a color image of your black and white photo. How they managed to keep it registered, how they managed to keep 8 or 10 stones, the stones are not lined up, but the image has to be perfect on each one so that the image comes out right. But you got a color on each of those stones, a different color, and the end process gives you these ethereal, full color, slightly grainy almost, but authentic looking color images, which as postcards were like a sensation, because they were described at the time as being nature's colors. This is the way nature really looks like that. And so now you've got people traveling on the trains. You've got these new color images that they can mail back to their friends in Boston or Washington, D.C., and you're promoting tourism. The railroads are happy. The tourism people on the other end are happy, and things are grand. And to the point, here you've got William Henry Jackson traveling around, taking more and more photographs of different places. Here's Gettysburg up here on the top left, and Mesa Verde Park. He's one of the first people to go and research Mesa Verde National Park. He takes photographs, and it then becomes a national park. So he's having a political impact as well. So he went back west, William Henry Jackson, photographing railroads, hotels, and all that, trying to pull tourists out to see all this. They're getting postcards in the mail, and they're saying, Martha, we have to go. Let's go out there. He's also photographing the cities. Here are two of Washington, D.C. Right there, Pennsylvania Avenue, 1902. That's an early Phostent. And then the hotel, former post office on the right, which is still there, also a Phostent. Out west, he's taking photographs of the Yellowstone Lodge, which is still out there. That's a 1905 postcard. And then even in New York, this is, I think one of these is the Flatiron Building, and the other one I think is the Times Square buildings where the gorilla does his thing. 1904. And this is, I love this card because you actually see the buildings, which now are ancient, being built. And but again, I mean, look at the quality of the color in this. It's amazing. Um, as a result, because of this complicated process, the postcards were expensive for the time. You see the price up there in the corner, 2 cards for 5 cents. Later, they're going to start charging 5 cents. Are you kidding me? 5 cents for a postcard? But they sold because, again, nature's coloring. That's the way it actually looks. And I could capture that in an image and mail it to you. You've got another classic way to identify a Fostent if you're flipping through cards, the white border all the way around. In the early days, before March 1907, that border kicks in and to give you room to write your messages. After 1907, when you can use the full front of a card for that image, according to the Postal Service, then you just get you get a smaller border around the card, but you still have a border all the way around the card. So another classic way. So look at the color, look at the white border all the way around it. And then the caption, you see the caption down there in the bottom left, are always red. I'm colorblind. I can't tell if that one is red. It looks a little blue to me, but they're always red, except maybe for that one. It's the only one I've ever seen that wasn't. And between 1900 and 1910, which is a really the heyday of Fostent postcards, you've got a little palette image. This card is actually preceding that. You'll see a palette image that none of these have it. Let me go back and find one that does. Yeah, see those two? You see that palette, that red palette that gives you the year, and it says copyright by Detroit Photographic, in that case, Photographic Company, 1905, 1904. That's a classic way to identify that particular decade of Fostent cards. And then down in the far left, bottom left, you see numbers, different codes of a sequence of numbers that will actually, with a guide, and there is one online, will tell you what year that card was first printed. People will go on to use the same image and the same card for another 20 years or more. But that number will always tell you when the card was first printed. So it's an easy way to date the cards. Okay, there we go. Go back. So this is very popular. There's a lot of action going on out there. And Detroit Publishing Company and William Henry Jackson are taking full advantage of this. They're the part of the people pushing this along. They're producing, as you see, between 1903 and 1924, up to 7 million Fostent postcards every year of, they say, 28,000 different images. That's a lot of cards. I want to find them all. This is why I go to postcard collections and I flip through and I'm trying to find, using those identifying markers, vividly looking for Fostent postcards, which I think are fantastic. So they're producing 7 million Fostent cards every year. Postcards, as it says, were the social media of their day. That's the way you kept in tune with all your buddies out there, with your potential girlfriends. And it was aided by the fact that the Postal Service was delivering in urban areas anyway, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, so that you can send a card in the morning announcing a meeting for that evening. And some cases in the early afternoon, you get a response back from people who have received the card saying, yes, I'll be there. You may have seen these in your own collecting. But there's a lot of Postal Service, a lot of deliveries up to twice a day in the cities, and people are exchanging postcards back then the way that we would exchange emails our Facebook post right now. Jackson is in addition to being a good photographer, he's a savvy businessman. He works a deal with a variety of different photographers and a variety of different companies. He's now begun, he's the manager of Detroit Publishing Company, and he buys images from other photographers. And he turns those into postcards as well, or parlor images, whatever is better. And he sells them. He works a really big deal with Fred Harvey, who a lot of you, I'm sure, have seen Fred Harvey cards. Most famous in the American Southwest, where Fred Harvey set up what was basically the first franchise, hotel franchise, for a lot of them were in national parks, and even today, like Yellowstone Lodge and the others, you'll see the same image of those hotels in national parks, which at the time were Fred Harvey owned properties. Fred Harvey also has a line of postcards, and so he starts his own print runs based on Fostent's cards. So here you see coming out of the Detroit Publishing Company, a Fostent from around 1920, Enchanted Mesa, New Mexico. On the back, you got the text that describes it. Fostent, printed Fostent, which every Fostent card will have on it after that date, certain date. And at the bottom, you see the very same image and even the same number, the coding number in the bottom left, in the caption, printed under contract with Fred Harvey Company. And they use the same caption and everything. So there's a lot of business activity going on. They're selling a lot of postcards. But every once in a while, they don't have a recent image of, for example, Raton Pass. What all they have is this 1907 image of this stagecoach coming down the hill here. There's cattle and horses in front of it, and here comes the train through the tunnel. And that's an amazing, beautiful Fostent postcard. Below that, it's 1914. The scene has changed, but they don't have an image of it. They haven't sent a photographer out to take a new image of Raton Pass. So this is great. Somebody draws in all the new aspects of that scene. Notice how the stagecoach and the cattle haven't moved in 7 years. They've been standing there waiting for the train to be built. On the left, somebody, I don't even know how you would do that, but they've got the original image, the train coming through through the tunnel, and left to it, there's the new tunnel and the new track that have been built since 1907, but they need to be in the postcard, so let's just draw them in. I think that's fascinating that they could do that and would do that. And then by 1908, 670 million postcards by various publishers were traveling through the US postal system every year. Like we said, it was the social media of the day. It was Facebook and email all rolled into one. You got it on postcards. We're the beneficiaries of that 100 years later, because we get to go look through the files and buy the best of the images and then turn over on the back and see what they were doing that day, who they were addressing and what it was all about. But postcard correspondence, I don't know what it'd be interesting to do a study on what causes postcards to diminish in popularity. Other companies, of course, are beginning to produce color images, color postcards of themselves. So Detroit Publishing Company is starting to waver a little bit, the way probably a lot of parts of the economy were then, as everything changes after World War I. So Detroit Publishing starts to emphasize posters and art reproductions. They do images of famous artworks, some of which end up as postcards, and you can look for those. Also Fostents. They do book illustrations, but the company is teetering, and William Henry Jackson moves to Washington, D.C., where he goes to work for the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Park Service, still pushing that combination of national parks and postcards. And he's a successful photographer, respected, and he's a successful businessman because he made good money while he was working for Detroit. In 1924, he joined the Cosmos Club, which is still downtown Washington, D.C. here, which had been founded by Powell, the guy what's his name, Mariana? William Powell, the first guy to traverse the Grand Canyon in a wooden boat with one arm. He was a Civil War veteran. He had one arm, and he rows down the Grand Canyon River right through it and helps get that established as a Grand Canyon. So he's hanging out with William Henry Jackson at the Cosmos Club. And meanwhile, Jackson is working again for the Park Service, researching the Oregon Trail, the history of the Oregon Trail and how it was foundational in creating America, extending us all the way to Oregon to the Pacific coast. In 1936, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and the National Park Service hired Jackson to paint landscape murals on the interior walls of the interior building down on C Street in Washington, D.C. And you can still go in there, go through security. You can see the murals that William Henry Jackson painted just before World War II. He published an autobiography, and then later he moved to New York City and hung out at the Explorers Club with other people, people who had been all over the world. But he's a recognized individual. Meantime, he's still living off of the money he made from selling postcards more than anything else. He died in 1942. He's 99 years old and is buried today at Arlington Cemetery as one of the last veterans of the Civil War. Remember, back at the beginning, he was in the Vermont infantry in the Civil War, Union side, of course. So today, to look at original images that William Henry Jackson took, including a huge collection of postcards and his huge parlor prints, these enormous big black and white prints that you put up on the wall. The biggest collection of those, of the originals, are at Scotts Bluff National Monument, which is in Nebraska out on the plains. It is a unit of the National Park System. And Scotts Bluff is known and remembered because it was a landmark, a place that you could see from miles away as you're coming across the plains on your wagon or on your mule. You could see this big bluff. You see the tiny image of it over there on the left. And it was historical because the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Mormon Trail all used this bluff as a marker, and they all passed through there. So that's the American Western history going down that path. Today, you can go visit Scotts Bluff National Monument, and in their archive, they have this huge collection. I have not seen it yet. Mariana and I are planning the trip. You see this large collection of photographs, postcards, and I can't wait to go visit that. And then, now I'm going to talk about today card collecting of Fosstens. They're still avidly collected. And you can sometimes find cards at shows. I also went out to Dulles last week, Clarissa, and I found 4 prized Fosstens. I went through the areas that I thought there might be some Fosstens, mainly Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, and I found 4 really nice ones and paid about $2 a piece for them. But I went online today to look at what's available online through eBay. And there were cards there listed for $49, $39. Cards that, as collectors, you would probably say, yeah, they're in good shape, well protected, and of really good age and good quality. But all the way up to, $40, $50 for a card if you're really interested in that one. There are at least 2 catalogs of Fosstens or topics for Fossten postcards, but I have yet to see one. And I've looked on online, Googled it and looked at eBay trying to find, maybe someday somebody will sell one of these catalogs. I'd love to have the catalog, but I've never seen one for sale. So here you see further examples of what a FOSS tent looks like. Your white border, your red caption, bottom left, the number in the bottom that helps you date it. And then this incredibly ethereal color. It looks like a Turner painting, the one up on the right of the boat. When I see these cards, I go, are there better cards than that any place in the world? No, there aren't. The FOSS tents are the peak to me of color postcards. Then there's just a few images of how it goes yippee on you sometimes. This is Grand Canyon of Arizona, printed as a postcard. This is almost assuredly a William Henry Jackson photograph, even though none of the cards are labeled, by the way. None of them are bylines. So you never know for sure, is that William Henry Jackson or is that somebody else? But you can usually tell by the date and the place. This is where he was at that time, and that's an image that he would take. Mailed in 1904, and it will go on to become a national park in 1919. And the thing I find interesting about this is that it's printed there at a specific date around 1900. The cards are very narrow horizontally. They're narrow, more so than a 3.5 by 5 card that you would find any other card. And I've got 2 or 3 of these, and I just find it interesting that were they trying to save paper? Did they have a roll of paper that was that size? Are there other cards? Maybe you guys can help me. Are there cards of other publishers of that time that are in that narrow format? And within a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, it widens out and all the cards are printed out as what we would call the regular antique postcard format. And then this one we know is a William Henry Jackson because he also printed the image. The photograph itself is black and whites, but that for sure is a FOSS tent postcard, 1906, but of an original William Henry Jackson black and white photograph that has been hand tinted through that elaborate process of photochrome, now known as FOSS tint, to produce what are these incredible natural color images of FOSS tent postcards. And that's what I have to say about that. This is a bibliography that, if this is recorded, anybody who wants to go and find out more about William Henry Jackson, about Yellowstone National Park, here's a little bibliography that will help you through that.
Thank you very much, Jim. This was fantastic.
Not a question, but I wanted to hear what else you had to say about parlor prints. Were these like 8x10s or 4x5s or bigger? Or were they
Big.
just for people to frame and have in their homes?
Yeah, the place that they come to mind where I've seen them is Mariana will remember this. Out of Denver, there's an old historic hotel that you can still visit, a historic place there up in the mountains. And we went there with some friends from Denver. And all along the walls, there are these huge black and white prints. And they are, let me figure, probably 3 feet by 1.5 feet.
Wow.
And nice ornate frames. And they have there, because it's this historic hotel for a good reason, they have them all around the room. But you can imagine one of those in somebody's parlor, and they're so proud of the fact that they've got a picture of the American West. Maybe they've been there, or cousin Harry went out there on the train. But they now have this, and it would be like having, I don't know, what you would point to with pride. I've got this new image of Andy Warhol. I got the
right
on the wall, but that was in the parlor era. That was it. And so we went to this hotel, and there's all these images. I start looking at them, and they're all William Henry Jackson images. I could not believe it. And then this was so cool. We went over and we looked at, there's the old guest book, and they're in 1902, signed William Henry Jackson, guest of the historic hotel. It was fantastic. I just fell on the floor I'm crying.
Jim, Jim,
Huh?
the hotel is in Georgetown, Colorado,
Yeah.
and it's run by the Colonial Dames Society,
Good.
in case
Fantastic.
anybody wants to go
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a company collection still out there in existence? You know, like the Kurt Tike Company archives are in Chicago.
Um,
Or is there some major, huge collector that has every Detroit publishing card ever printed or something like
No,
that?
it's an astute question. I'd say there are 3 or 4 places that have huge collections of it. One of which, for some reason, is the Henry Ford Museum
Yeah.
in Michigan. But there you go, Detroit, Michigan, for some reason. The New York Public Library has an enormous collection of his work, apparently.
Huh.
I haven't seen any of these yet. Scotts Bluff, of course, will have a huge postcard collection. Then Lauder, you've all heard of the guy Lauder, who's a big postcard collector out of New York, an heir of the Lauder perfume company. He's or was a very enormous postcard collector, and wherever his archives are, you can find all this online. He's got a big collection of William Henry Jackson and postcards. So there are probably 3 or 4 places. Smithsonian probably has some. I haven't gone to look yet. But there are a lot out there, mainly in archives. I think it's increasingly harder to find them in shows. And by giving this talk, I'm not trying to create a lot of competition. You guys. I'm going to send you my email.
late.
You just let
Too
me
late
a
for
phone number. You just call me from wherever you are, and I'll be there. Just wait for me. But you all have your own collections. So.
Roseanne?
I want to, first of all, I had a different question, but I'd like to answer Larry's question. Because the Henry Ford is in the Detroit area,
Yeah.
they donated everything to the Henry Ford Museum. And then Jackson's son Clarence, who lived in Denver, wanted the collection to actually go to the Colorado Historical Museum.
Oh.
And so it got divided, but it was everything of the West and everything of the East went to the Library of Congress.
Wow.
Including the postcards. So
I am so happy. I'm so happy to learn of a fellow aficionado for William Henry Jackson.
yeah, I am.
So good. Yeah.
Definitely. So, and I don't want to, I want to make a couple corrections.
Please do. Please do.
Okay, one of them is the process you were describing is not for the postcards. They only get
No.
like 4 colors, the plain cyan, magenta,
Yeah. Okay.
yellow, and black. But the multiple layers were for what are called the photochromes. And you
Yeah.
can, those were the larger prints, and you can tell that one is because it has gold lettering at the bottom.
Ah, cool.
And if you go onto the LOC website, all you have to do is type in photochrome and it'll come up with these images and you can just scroll through them.
Of which website? What do you call it?
The Library of Congress.
Oh, Library of
LOC.
LOC.gov.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Good information. So maybe you can explain to me this big question I had is, how do you take these flat stones for postcards, as you say, I guess 4 rather than the 8 or 10 that they're using on bigger images? How do you take those flat stones and how do you get the same color in the same spot on the next run of postcards? In other words, you don't stop the run, you don't press out a bunch of postcards or images.
Well,
And
they
then
did
people
them on
run in.
big sheets and then cut them.
Really?
And actually you can see it. I think it's from the Henry Ford's website.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the Library of Congress, one of the two, but I forget. The sheets do not look, I mean, it's like, it's not the same image throughout the whole sheet, but there'll be multiple images on that sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But how do they get the color back on the stones for the next run, for the next sheet of
That
card?
I can't tell you because that's something I don't know.
No, me either.
And because they kept it very secret.
Ah.
Hmm.
Ah.
I think that everyone working there had to have an NDA.
Yeah, yeah, non-disclosure agreement. Another interesting sidebar on that is that William Henry Jackson he's an artist. He draws and he photographs, but so he wasn't into the technical aspect of it. And I don't know whether they excluded even him
Well,
from
he didn't
how this
found the
worked.
company, a man named Herbert Husher did.
Aha,
And he was friends with Jackson. And to start the company, he wanted Jackson's negatives because
for
his
sure. Yeah,
collection was so huge.
yeah.
And then another thing is, there's two more things that is Powell, after working for the Hayden expedition in the Northwest, he worked for the Powell expedition in the Southwest. So he started out working for both of them, but
Yeah.
one after the other.
Dynamite.
But the other thing I want to correct, and this one I'm not, is the one, they're not all red type on the
Oh, they're
blue.
not? Oh, so I'm
No.
not totally colorblind. That was
No,
blue.
not totally, but there's also the blue, and quite often the color would indicate which country they were printed in.
Ah, cool.
As time went by, they were all standardized with gray type.
Yeah, good. So I take it you have a collection of fuss tints yourself?
Yeah, but I'm donating them to the Bancroft Library.
To the what? Which one? I'm gonna go see them.
Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley.
Oh, gotcha. Bancroft. Yeah, I know that. I did a postdoc at Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
so I actually know that library. And so you have a collection. You have some. You're going to donate them to the Bancroft. Fantastic. I'll go see them there. I love that. But I really appreciate
Well, they're
that.
going to be digitized and online, so you don't have to
Excellent.
go there. You could just, like you do with the Library of Congress, just kind of
Yeah.
go through them.
Yeah, it's an honor to meet you and hear from you.
This is John Conley. Here is one of the postcards that I used in my book. I think there's like 3 of them. Now, this is the old Senate chamber in the State House in Annapolis. And you probably have all the Baltimore and Annapolis cards, but I'll go through mine in case you don't.
Dynamite.
So what I did
That
is
was beautiful.
took this one. Here is the postcard, and then here's the photograph that shows what it is today. But what I find particularly interesting about, if I know how to do this, with this one is, and you made the point, there's just no color images from 1906. They didn't have color film. And I've found, and I'm sure everybody else has, when you go through doing some of these things, there was a little creative at times of what color maybe the roof really was. But I know that they restored this back to what it is today at the Senate chamber at State House in Annapolis. And I'd have to think and hope that maybe whomever did this postcard was very diligent in writing colors down, because the wall in the current one that they just opened a couple years ago is a somewhat similar yellow in the background. But anyway, it was a fascinating presentation. And I'll go through and look at all my Annapolis and Naval Academy and see if I have any that would be of interest.
Good.
I wrote in the chat, I think the two of you should team up and write a little book or a blog or something, because you have such a combined, lovely database that can teach others.
And an obvious admiration for William Henry Jackson and
Yes.
postcards. So
Yes. Yeah. Maybe it'll be in the Library of Congress. You can write a little white paper or some such.
yeah,
I was just kind of
Thank you.
curious if you had any little Fostin journey booklets or pack packs of the 40 sets of cards.
I saw a couple of those advertised online, just looking at today, and that's new to me. So I'm just learning about those, but it looked like a packet, like a packet of loose cards. Have you seen these in the flesh?
I
In the
have
paper?
actually. Yeah,
Huh?
they're a little slip cover, and there's 40 in a set. And Detroit did 50 volumes of those.
Jump
So
back.
they're worth taking a look at.
Do they do you know whether can you disaggregate them, or is it one of those fold down Miami?
No, it's not a
Florida
fan.
things?
No, it's not a fan, an accordion. It's not,
Yeah.
there's single sets of 40 cards.
That's
There's
great.
American Indian set, there's
Oh,
Boston,
man.
New York. I mean, they did all the major cities. I think, and they were published in 1912 to 13.
Fantastic.
So all of the cards in there were just extra cards that they had in the company, and they just popped them in the box, in these little boxes.
Mike, you just totally blew my retirement account.
Watch out. Thank you, Michael. I heard somebody else want to make a comment. Hall, yes.
Just real briefly, but you're so lucky because tonight we have Roseanne as well as Michael Langenstein from New York City. All three of you are Detroit folks, so you need to exchange emails and snuggle up to each other. Be fun.
Great.
Well, I just
Great.
want to also add on to what Michael was commenting on the Fuston journeys, is they come in they originally had a display where they were in boxes that looked like a diary,
Yeah,
a book, so it looked like a book.
right.
And they would be sold in these sets. And then they started just making them in gray boxes.
Mm.
They were for educational use,
Yeah.
schools, because you have to realize at that time, no one traveled any more than 5 miles in any direction. So the idea to see the Grand Canyon or to see Niagara Falls, wow, for the first time, it would have been, like you said, sensational.
You know, that which brings up another aspect I didn't mention. I showed an image of a stereographic photograph of Old Faithful geyser. Do you remember that early part of the presentation? But William Henry Jackson took a lot of stereo. He had a stereo camera, and he took a lot of stereo shots as well, which I remember, like as a boy in West Texas, going into the county library, and there was a table over there, and this the stereoscope machine, this wooden thing. Then you put a card. It has 2 photos in it, slightly offset, so that you get a 3D image. When you look through the stereoscope, you see this 3D image in it. You actually see Old Faithful exploding. And it was so exciting when I was 8 years old to go into the library and see that. But he did a lot of stereoscopic photographs, the double photographs. And I've never really gotten into investigating those, but I'm sure those are in strong collections as well in places.
Well, go to the Library of Congress. They have them there.
Yeah, great.
Spend a weekend there.
Yes.
Just online.
Yeah, right in your.
Although for you could go there, but you'd need to reserve the collection first.
Jim, you should get a hold of Jeremy Rowe. He wrote the book on stereo photography. I'm gonna give Jeremy a plug.
He has a book about stereo postcards. Cool. Thank you very much, Jim. This was fantastic. I learned a lot, and we all learn. And thank you for the discussion as well afterwards for everybody.